Marvin Bagley has reinvented his game ever since getting traded to the Detroit Pistons. For the most part, when Marvin was playing with the Sacramento Kings, he was labeled as an NBA draft bust and overall was just struggling pretty tremendously. But so far early on into his Pistons career, he looks like a completely different player. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetic.
Marvin Bagley was drafted with the number 2 overall selection in the 2018 NBA draft by the Sacramento Kings. And going into that year's draft, Marvin was seen as a phenomenal talent. He was seen as a very versatile big that had the ability to put the ball on the floor and drive all the way to the basket, had a decent mid-range jump shot, and overall was just very versatile and would be perfect for the new age NBA. And to really demonstrate how good people thought Marvin could be going into the NBA draft, Marvin was actually drafted over players like Luka Doncic and Trae Young. And even going into the NBA draft and not knowing what we know now, a guy like Luka Doncic especially was seen as a potential number 1 overall selection. So it's not like people didn't necessarily know how good Luka could be. They knew he was going to be a really good player or could be a very good player at the very least. But in Marvin Bagley's rookie season, I would say he had a pretty solid year. Marvin was averaging around 15 points per game on 50% shooting from the field, 7.6 rebounds per game, and also adding 1 assist to his game as well. But although Marvin was clearly putting up some pretty solid numbers in his rookie year, there was a lot of NBA fans that were disappointed in his performance. And the biggest reason that fans were disappointed was due to the fact that 2 players that went under Marvin in Luka Doncic and Trae Young were absolutely going off in the rookie season, and when you compared how they were playing to how Marvin was playing in his rookie year, they were basically not comparable, and it was pretty clear, at least at that point, that those 2 players were far better than Marvin was. And fans around the NBA were just a little upset, especially Kings fans, because they thought that maybe Marvin was a draft bust or should not have been drafted that highly. Now, of course, hindsight is 20/20, but looking back now, I think it's pretty obvious that Marvin was drafted too highly in that year's draft. But one thing that I wanted to touch upon, because I feel like this happens in every draft, but whenever a player gets drafted high in the draft, and there's a player that gets drafted a little bit later than that player, and the player that gets drafted later turns out to be a much better player than the other guy that got drafted higher, I feel like NBA fans always put the pressure on the player that got drafted higher to live up or even be better than the player that got drafted lower, but I don't necessarily think it's their fault that they're not better than that player. It's more so the fault of the team that actually drafted them for thinking they were a better player than they were, and that extra added pressure could sometimes turn into a negative and make that player become even worse in the long run because they have all those expectations of being an all-star or a superstar type guy when maybe in reality they were never destined to be that type of player. And I basically think that's exactly what happened to Marvin Bagley, because although Marvin had a pretty good rookie season, people expected him to be as good as those other 2 guys as I mentioned in Luka and Trae Young, when in reality he was never going to be that good anyway. So putting those unrealistic expectations on him, and if he didn't live up to those expectations, call him an NBA draft bust, I thought was a little unfair and seems to happen in every year's draft. And honestly, I think due to that, Marvin got a little bit worse as time went on. Now, I'm not saying that you can't call any players draft bust, because I definitely think there's players that are busts in each and every draft, but I just personally thought it was a little unfair for people to call Marvin a draft bust in his rookie season after having a pretty solid year. But in Marvin's second season, he averaged around 14 points per game on 46% shooting from the field, 7.5 rebounds, and 0.8 assists. Now, once again, Marvin had a pretty good season in his second year as well, but the one major issue that he had in his second year was the fact that he wasn't really improving from his first year, and not only was he not improving, he was actually getting a little bit worse. Now, of course, it wasn't that much. His statistics are basically the same in year 2 from year 1, but of course, whenever you draft a player very highly in the year's draft, you always want to see them improve season after season. Now, in Marvin Bagley's third season, which is the 2020 season, a trend was starting to form. Marvin basically put up the same statistics once again for 3 straight years, and just the lack of improvement was becoming a pretty big issue for him. But things started to get worse in the 2021 NBA season, which is this year, where Marvin's numbers basically went down across the board. He averaged around 9 points per game on 46% shooting from the field, 7.2 rebounds, and 0.6 assists. Now, I feel like after 4 NBA seasons, it was pretty clear to a lot of people that Marvin was becoming becoming an NBA draft bust, and I think in my opinion, it was pretty fair to call him a draft bust based upon the fact that not only was he not improving as the seasons progressed, but he was actually regressing a little bit as well. And basically at that point during this season, Marvin Bagley didn't really have much value at all, and he ended up getting traded to the Detroit Pistons for not much in return as well. And of course, not too many people were all that high in Marvin Bagley at the time of the trade, but for the few people who still were pretty high in Marvin, they were very excited that Marvin was getting traded away from the Sacramento Kings, and especially going to a team like the Pistons, where they were a pretty young team with basically no expectations, and Marvin could just thrive with some of those younger players, especially with Cade Cunningham running the show. Now, of course, it's been a relatively small sample size, but so far Marvin has looked like a completely different player for the Pistons. In his 17 games played with the Pistons, Marvin's averaging around 15 points per game on 56% shooting from the field, 6.8 rebounds, and also adding 1 assist to his game as well. Now, of course, anything could happen, and Marvin could completely fall off a cliff after some games pass, but the real question is, why is Marvin playing so much better so far with the Pistons than he ever did with the Kings? So I really think it comes down to a few different factors. The first factor is just the fact that he got away from that Sacramento Kings organization and kind of got away from all those expectations of being the number 2 overall draft pick. I think whatever team he would have went to, he probably would have played a little bit better just getting out of that situation overall. Now, the next factor is the team that he actually got traded to in the Detroit Pistons, and as I mentioned before, I think the Pistons are just a better situation for him, where they basically have no expectations to do anything this season, and they just have a pretty nice collective unit of young guys. And I think when you look at the actual talent they have on the court, specifically Marvin and a guy like Cade Cunningham have been meshing together pretty well so far, I would say. They're running the pick and roll / pick and pop specifically pretty effectively, and I think Cade's making Marvin's life a lot easier than it ever was in Sacramento. And also when you talk about guys like Saddiq Bey, who do a phenomenal job at spreading the court out for a guy like Marvin who does a lot of his work in the deep post. Isaiah Stewart is another guy who of course can't spread the floor, but at least defensively is known as a really good defender and certainly could help Marvin out on that end as well a little bit. Jeremy Grant also does a nice job at spreading the floor, but I think even besides the players, the fact that he's playing for a team like the Pistons who don't necessarily have expectations on them and just have a nice young group of players is a very good benefit to Marvin. But now, what are my personal expectations for Marvin Bagley long term? Do I think he's going to be potentially a part of the Pistons long term plans, or do I think he's only going to be a guy who's playing well this season, but after this he's going to go back to the player that he was for Sacramento? In my opinion, I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle, at least for me. I think Marvin certainly has a capability to play as well as he has been playing as of late, and certainly has enough talent to even get better as the years progress. The biggest thing with him is he just needs to continue to work on his game each and every offseason in order to actually improve his game each and every season. And I think if Marvin just continues to improve his game each and every year, even if he never gets to an all-star type level, which I personally don't think he will get to, I think he could be a very valuable player in the NBA. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Marvin Bagley could potentially hold this up for the Pistons long term, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetic. Hope you can't go